Picture this moment. You're standing at the edge of the known world, watching the horizon darken not with storm clouds, but with something far more terrifying. The largest military force ever assembled in human history is marching straight toward you. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of warriors from across the Persian Empire, their armor glinting like scales on some massive serpent stretching beyond the limits of your vision. Their footsteps thunder across the earth like an earthquake that refuses to end. Now here's the kicker. You've got exactly 300 men standing beside you. Most people would call this suicide. The Spartans called it Tuesday. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how a handful of warriors nearly broke the back of the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. This isn't just another tale of ancient warfare. This is the moment when the entire course of Western civilization hung in the balance, decided by men who chose death over surrender and turned a narrow mountain pass into the most famous battlefield in history. But here's what most people don't understand about the Battle of Thermopylae. This wasn't just about 300 Spartans having a bad day. This was the culmination of decades of rising tension between two completely different ways of life. On one side, you had the Persian Empire under Xerxes I, a godlike ruler who commanded the loyalty of millions across 3 continents. On the other side, you had the Greeks, a collection of fractious city-states who could barely agree on what to eat for breakfast, let alone how to defend their homeland. The Persians had already tasted Greek defiance once before. Back in 490 BCE, Darius I had sent a massive expedition to punish Athens for supporting rebellious cities in his empire. That campaign ended in disaster at Marathon, where 10,000 Athenians and their Plataean allies crushed a Persian force twice their size. But that victory came with a price. The Persians would be back, and next time, they wouldn't underestimate their enemies. When Darius died in 486 BCE, his son Xerxes inherited both the throne and a burning desire for revenge. But Xerxes wasn't content with simply punishing Athens. He wanted to conquer all of Greece, to add these defiant city-states to his vast collection of subject peoples. For 4 years, he prepared the largest military expedition the ancient world had ever witnessed. The numbers are staggering, even by today's standards. Ancient sources claimed Xerxes commanded over 2 million soldiers, though modern historians place the figure between 120,000 and 300,000 troops. Even at the lower estimate, this was a force large enough to drain rivers dry as they passed and strip entire regions bare of food. The Persian army included warriors from across the known world. Median cavalry with their curved swords, Scythian archers whose arrows could darken the sky, Ethiopian spearmen, Arabian camel riders, and at the heart of this massive host, the legendary 10,000 immortals. These weren't your average soldiers. The immortals were the Persian Empire's ultimate weapon, recruited exclusively from Persian and Median nobility. They received their terrifying name from their unique organization. Whenever one fell in battle, another immediately took his place, maintaining their numbers at exactly 10,000. To their enemies, they seemed literally immortal, an endless tide of elite warriors who could never be depleted. Each immortal carried a spear tipped with silver pomegranates for the first 1,000, golden apples for the rest. Their shields were made of wicker, their armor light but effective. Most importantly, they fought with the absolute confidence of men who had never known defeat, who served an empire that stretched from India to Egypt, from the Black Sea to the Persian Gulf. Against this overwhelming force stood the Greeks, and they were a mess. City-states that had spent centuries fighting each other suddenly had to cooperate against a common enemy. Athens and Sparta, the 2 most powerful cities, had barely managed to work together at Marathon. Now they faced a threat that made their previous, offering earth and water as symbols of their chaotic. Some cities immediately submitted to Persian demands. Differences seemed petty. The Greek response was typically surrender. Others wavered, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. But a core group of city-states, led by Sparta and Athens, chose resistance. Their plan was born of desperation and geography. Greece's mountainous terrain offered natural defensive positions, but only one really mattered. About 150 kilometers north of Athens lay a narrow coastal pass called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Here, steep mountains plunged directly into the sea, leaving only a strip of marshy ground barely wide enough for a cart to pass through. If the Persians wanted to reach the heart of Greece, they had to come through Thermopylae, and if the Greeks could hold that pass, they could neutralize the Persian numerical advantage. In the narrow confines of the Hot Gates, 1,000 men could fight as effectively as 10,000. The Greek strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Hold Thermopylae at all costs, buying time for their combined fleet to engage the Persian navy and for the main Greek army to prepare defensive positions further south. It was a plan that required absolute commitment because everyone understood one crucial fact. The men who marched north to Thermopylae weren't coming back. This is where the legend begins to separate from the logistics. When word reached Sparta that Xerxes was marching toward Greece, the Spartan leadership faced an impossible choice. Their entire army numbered around 8,000 of the finest warriors on earth, men who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of fight. But there was a problem, and it wasn't military strategy. The Spartans were trapped by their own religious calendar. The sacred festival of Carneia was underway, followed immediately by the Olympic Games. Spartan law absolutely forbade warfare during these holy periods. This wasn't just tradition, this was cosmic order. To violate it would invite the wrath of the gods themselves. So when King Leonidas volunteered to march north with an advance force, he could only take 300 men. But here's the twist that makes your spine tingle. These weren't just any 300 warriors. Every single man was handpicked according to one terrifying criterion. He had to have living sons who could carry on his bloodline. Think about what that means. Leonidas wasn't selecting his best fighters for a dangerous mission. He was choosing 300 men to die. Each of these warriors represented the absolute pinnacle of Spartan military culture. They had survived the agoge, the brutal training system that turned boys into living weapons. Starting at age 7, they had endured beatings, starvation, and psychological torment designed to forge unbreakable mental toughness. They learned to fight in the phalanx formation, where individual survival depended entirely on the man standing next to you. The phalanx was more than military tactics. It was a philosophy-mated shield called a hoplon, weighing around 15 flesh. Each warrior carried a massive bronze face pounds. These shields were designed to protect not just the bearer, but the man to his left. Your survival depended on your comrade's courage, and his survival depended on yours. Break that chain anywhere, and the entire formation collapsed. When Spartan mothers handed their sons these shields before battle, they had one simple instruction: come back with your shield, or on it. There was no third option. As Leonidas and his 300 marched north, they were joined by allies from across Greece. 7,000 men in total would make their stand at Thermopylae, including 1,000 from Thebes, 700 from Thespiae, and contingents from a dozen other city-states. But everyone understood that the Spartans were the backbone of this force, the iron core around which the entire defense would revolve. The march to Thermopylae took them through some of the most beautiful countryside in Greece, past olive groves and mountain villages, where people lined the roads to watch them pass. These weren't victory parades. They were funeral processions for men who were still breathing. When they reached the Hot Gates, Leonidas surveyed the ground with the eye of a master tactician. The pass was everything they had hoped for and more. At its narrowest point, the gap between mountain and sea measured barely 50 feet across. Ancient landslides had created natural defensive walls, and hot springs bubbling up from underground gave the place its name. But Leonidas quickly discovered a problem that would haunt the entire campaign. A mountain trail called the Thermopylae path wound through the hills above Thermopylae, emerging behind the Greek position. Any force that controlled this path could surround the defenders and turn their perfect defensive position into a death trap. When Xerxes finally broke through Thermopylae 3 days later, he had paid a price that shook his empire to its core. The 300 Spartans were dead, but they had bought Greece something priceless: time, hope, and proof that the mighty Persian war machine could bleed. Within a year, the Greek fleet would crush the Persian navy at Salamis, and their army would shatter Xerxes' dreams at Plataea. Leonidas and his warriors didn't just make a last stand at the hot gates. They lit a fire that would burn across centuries, inspiring everyone who ever faced impossible odds and chose to fight anyway. Sometimes 300 men really can stop an empire, not by winning, but by showing the world what it means to never surrender.